All right, I want to redo the Ed Cattle story. One of the many videos I deleted was I told a quick story about Ed Cattle, and that was actually his name. And I met him at Gordo's over in Bloomfield, New Jersey on Glenwood Avenue. He worked the night shift clean. He was a cleanup guy, and I started out as a fire setter. But anyway, first off, what you're looking at here is this is my proto board for crystal radio sets. And yes, I still build crystal radio circuitry. I run experiments. Now this one here, uh, it uses two toroid coils and they're coupled with just a couple turns around one, a couple turns around another. It's a loop and it works very well. And a guy named Geo John did this. He did a Heathkit CR1 over using toroids. And I used toroids several different ways in a crystal radio set. And then this last few days, right now I got the way Geo John did it. But I also built it real quick because I started thinking maybe I could magnetically couple the two toroid coils together with a magnet, but it didn't work, okay? But I didn't know. So I had to rebuild it, and I went and tried it. It didn't work. Then I went and used the Geo John's method of coupling the two toroid coils, because you can use a toroid coil as a tuned circuit for crystal radio. And it's different ways to get the signal off of the toroid. But I won't go into that. That's your job. But I want to tell you the Ed Cattle story. So I got this job on a night shift in Gordos, Bloomfield, New Jersey. Originally hired to be a fire setter. All I had to do was walk around and make sure the flames on the switches or on the machines that made mercury switches were correct, right temperatures, and you did that by eye. And one of the trick things was you have to learn. It's working into the summer. The women had these fans, these little tiny round fans that were down on the floor, and they'd blow up under their dresses to keep themselves cool. And if they got up to get a glass of water and they bumped that fan would turn and it would hit the flames, and it would totally mess the machine up. So the first thing when garbage starts coming off the machine or rejects, you go over and that's the first thing you check is the fan. You don't touch your flames. You make sure the fan is blowing in the correct direction. Then the next thing you do is the flames had like low pressure air, oxygen, and then gas. And you would look at it and you could tell it was formed right, or one of the jets. There were several sets of jets on the machine would get buildup, like a type of mineral from the gas, a reaction with the nozzle and the gas and the oxygen. And you had like a little piece of coat hanger, and you'd put it in the nozzle, and you'd swirl it around, and you'd see pieces come out. And suddenly, the flame was correct. So the first thing you did was make sure the fan wasn't hitting the flames. And sometimes it was a fan across the aisle that was coming across and hitting your flames and messing them up. So you had to, and once you understood that, that was one of the tricks. And then the other trick before you adjust any flame or anything is you clean out the flame, the nozzles, and you had to make sure that the group leader, it was a woman, she'd go around and clean the nozzles and knock them off. They were adjustable. So there was the three things you did right away before you touched anything. The other thing you had to do, you had to check the pressure gauges on the wall. Make sure someone didn't shut a valve off or something wacky like that. But anyway, that was my first job. And they had this guy named Charlie, and Charlie was in charge at night. And he was strange. I want to tell you, he was more than strange. He was writing a book about what the Air Force did to him. He was a pilot, and he claimed he had problems with his eyes because he flew above one of the stratospheres or whatever, and he was subjected to different light rays, ultraviolets and all that. This is what he claimed. And when you first heard the story, you're like, yeah, this guy, but he's writing a book. But it took him 6 months just to set the desk up and the pens. Had to be a certain type of pen, certain type of paper. Okay, he was crazy. All right, so what I didn't know was they hired me because I had some management skills. My first and second job, they put me in charge of things. My first and second job. So this place was like, we can groom him. We'll hire him as a fire starter. So I'm doing that, and then the boss says, I'm moving some girls down from upstairs into your department. I want you to integrate them. So I did. And then I noticed, I couldn't ask Charlie for any help anymore because he suddenly was missing. So I went into my boss and I said, what happened to Charlie? He says, oh, he's gone. He says, he's nuts. That's why I won't say his last name. But he says, he's gone. He's off the deep end. And I felt really bad for the guy. But then they made me group leader. They told me no longer listen to the group leader. It was a woman. She used to hold the switch out on the end of her arm. She needed glasses. And if you ever saw a mercury switch, it's inside of a thermostat. You got to look at the seals and the pins and if the heat is right on the glass. And this woman was holding this thing all the way out like a retard. Okay, and they put me in charge. And she was group leader, but I was over her. And then when she complained, they made me a manager. Okay, they immediately gave me a raise. I kept getting these raises. And at some point, I got rid of her. But anyway, back to Ed Cattle. This is the environment. I just wanted to get you an idea. Mercury switches. Girl would drop a bottle of mercury. It was an old Thomas Edison building. It was all wooden beam building. And when you'd walk across the floor, any mercury that spilt went between the cracks. So if you're on the next level, when you drank your coffee, you always had your hand over the coffee. So you wouldn't get any mercury in it, because as you would walk, mercury would dislodge from between the boards and drop into your coffee. Now, what's on that site now is a CVS. That site was remediated or whatever they did to it. So Gordos building is gone. There was a magnetic, I think it was American Magnetics or US Magnetics next door. That's gone. And there's a CVS there. So anyway, I'm now in charge of night shift. And I'm walking through this building. And I got a computer guy downstairs running this obsolete computer to do their billing and their payroll. And he's complaining to me. He goes, this is so old, this computer. He goes, I got a bunch of clients like this. I really want to learn new stuff. And yeah, okay. So I go down and talk to him a little bit every night for break. And then I bumped into this guy, Ed Cattle. And I would take my break with him. So I didn't have to be around the women, because the women that I had on the night shift, if you sat with them, they try to con you. They wanted more time for supper. We took I think a half hour for supper, and they want more because it was always somebody's birthday. And oh, Friday we get extra 15 minutes, and that was a lie. They made this stuff up. And I always check with my day shift boss, and he says, well, you do what you want, but don't let them push you around. But anyway, so I meet this guy, Ed Cattle. And Ed Cattle is like, picture me as SpongeBob, full of energy, want to see new things, rockets in my sockets. And Ed Cattle is like Squidward, okay? Now, if you never saw SpongeBob is this young sponge that is like real positive with life, and Squidward is like negative with everything because he's seen everything, all right? So I go in and I sit with Ed, and at break time, and I'd be sitting there, and as it would get towards the end of break, the women would start kicking their feet on the floor above me, telling me I got to get back. They had like special rules for me, but that things changed. I changed things. They didn't even see it coming. But anyway, Ed would tell me different stories and stuff, and then one day he just wanted to explain to me what he learned in life, and he explained it with this story. And I told the story once before, and I'm thinking about it. I said, he explained it one way, and I really didn't catch it that way. Well, anyway, he took his daughter to the park. It was Bloomfield Park, I believe it was, and it used to have a big pond in the middle of it. And people used to do their RC boats there. And the daughter was playing alongside the pond, or near the pond, and she had one of those cheap dollar balls. They're I call it a kickball. It's very light, and if it gets going with the wind, it could roll. And it rolled from the grass onto the pond. So Ed's standing there with his daughter, and they're watching the ball go out in the middle of the pond. And on the pond was an RC boat. So the father pointed to the ball to the kid, and the little kid took the remote control and guided the little boat and pushed the ball back, and then Ed picked it up and gave it to his daughter. So he's telling me the story, and I'm like, where's this going? So Ed says, yeah. He says when he saw that, he went out and he bought a kit, the servos, the receiver, and the recharger and the whole thing. And I said, well, how'd you make out? He goes, well, he says, I never got to finish it. And I go, yeah. He goes, my daughter just graduated college. I was like, uh-oh. So I said, there's something. He goes, yeah. He says, you know what the bad thing about it was? The guy made the boat that got the ball over to shore so he could get the ball for his daughter, was the guy took a 2x4, piece of 2x4, and he planed it real quick to make it look like a hull of a ship. And he mounted the servos and the receiver and the batteries to that with a rudder. You know, the rudder was just bolted on the back. And he took it down to the pond, and his son's driving this thing around in the pond. Now, Ed, to one-up it, bought a kit for the boat and all this other stuff, and it never got finished. And Ed was trying to explain to me that in life, that happens a lot. And at the time, he was having trouble with trying to make an LED light, a little module on the side of his camera. He used to take pictures at weddings. That was his other job. And he couldn't see the markings on the camera anymore. So he tried setting up an LED to light the settings. So when he was in a dark location shooting a wedding, he could look down, push a button, turn the LED light on, and then he could see the settings on the camera. Well, okay, his eyes were going, he was getting older. That's what the real problem was. I thought he was trying to make something that he could sell, but it wasn't. It was for him. And then I started listening to what he was saying, and he didn't realize an LED really needs a resistor in series. He says, well, they say the LED is 1.7 volts to something. I said, yeah, that's the voltage at the current, but you have to set the current with a resistor. And I said, I have an article. So I brought the magazine into it, and I showed him. I said, take this home and read it. And then the LEDs back in those days weren't that bright. So I got him into, I had some, what they call them, grain of wheat bulbs. And I gave him some of those. And he made the thing to light the camera. But Ed was explaining to me, you can go off on tangents on projects. And I said, yeah. I said, I'm on one right now. I was making a thermometer, a digital thermometer, and I built a drill press from scratch so I could drill holes in circuit boards late at night when my parents were asleep because I was working night shift. And I'd come home at 12. And I'd go down in the cell and I'd work on my projects and not try to wake anybody up. And I went off on the drill tangent. Then I started making circuit boards. That all worked, but I could never get the thermometer to read linear. And years later, it hit me. I was coating the thermistor with epoxy to make it waterproof, but the epoxy wouldn't let the thermistor flex. So it would make it non-linear in one part of the scale. I figured that out years later. Well, anyway, but Ed tried to instill into me, don't take on too many projects. You won't get to them. It'll end, like he says, here comes a motorcycle. He goes, yeah, my daughter just graduated college. And he said to me, you know, he says, when that guy had the son push that ball over to the edge of the shore so he could get it to give to his daughter, he was snickering that the guy took the 2x4 and real quickly cut it in the shape of a boat and mounted all the, back in those days, they were spring-loaded servos. They were wacky stuff. They weren't like the new ones we have now. But in the old days too, in most cases it was rudder only. You couldn't even control the throttle. But he said he was just snickering, and he went out and he bought a really good boat kit and a really good transmitter and receiver, and the boat never was built. It never saw water. The remote control unit never saw a boat, or the transmitter never got batteries in it. And he put that thought in my head. And I started looking at everything. I said, you know, I'm finishing most of the projects I'm working on. But then I started working with people that would come to my house with their projects, and they want me to finish it. You know, and then of course when they're telling other people, They just take my name out, and make it them. And that was the thing that burned me the most. A lot of my neighbors would have me do work, and then when they would tell the story, it was their son that did it. It was messed up. But that's one of the reasons I am the way I am. But I still build crystal radios. And I've built these toroids before. But I was sitting there one day, and I'm like, well, if the magnetic field is flexing in one toroid, and you got the other toroid, and you can link them together with a piece of wire, or you can link them together with a capacitor to get the signal from one toroid to the other. What about a magnetic field? Okay. And you say, well, the magnetic field doesn't leave the toroid that far. All right. But the magnet, you can actually feel the magnet pulling towards the toroid. So when you get the magnet a certain distance to the toroid, it starts becoming saturated, and the frequency of the toroid starts to go down. And you can control the frequency of a toroid circuit with a magnet. All right, so you got those two theories. So now you put the magnet close to two toroids, and you see how much signal actually goes across. Now, I didn't get the scope out. I just did it by ear. It is possible. I really should do that, I guess. In other words, see if it does get transferred through the magnetic field over to the other toroid. But it was an idea, and I said, I never tried it. And in my mind, I'm saying, you just can't say something unless you've actually tried it. I'm not one of those guys up on the internet sitting in a conference. Oh, toroids are no good. You can't use the signal. You can't get the signal out of a toroid. Well, there's two ways to get the signal out of a toroid. You put 2 turns of wire on that toroid, and you take those same 2 wires and go around twice on the other toroid, and then you solder the ends together of the link wire. And you can go 1 loop, which would be more selective, or 2 loops. Okay, there's all kinds of experiments. I think you should look up, but don't believe the toroids can't be used. They can be used. Okay, and it's amazing. I read it, I'm like, why wouldn't it be used? And then but those toroids there, I think they're T82-61. Now, the T82 is in metric size, and the 61 is the material that's used in ferret rod antennas. Okay, that's what I use. GeoJohn used something else, but I saw what he did, and I said, well, let me get into that game. And then you read what the people on the different groups say, and then you go reading how to make a crystal radio without actually having a pickup, or the 2 coils aren't next to each other. You come down out of the tune circuit through a couple turns to ground, and those couple turns go over to the other toroid. There's ways around it. You can use toroid coils, okay? So those guys, they're wrong, okay? And that's some of the things. But I just want to tell you the Ed Cattle story. And Ed would hide every night when I wasn't in charge. And I found him one day, and he come up, he jumped up with the rag, and he's making it like he's clean. I said, who are you? What are you doing? And he says, well, I'm supposed to be cleaning up here. I said, oh, all right. I said, I'm John. I'm a fire starter. I said, I'm down here only because the girls thought they heard something drop. And I come down here. He goes, oh, that was me. I said, fine. I said, And then when I became in charge of the night shift, I had the guy in the computer room, and he finally quit. And then I had a guy who used to come in just to get away from his wife, and he'd sit in one of the offices and get drunk. And then we had Ed, who was supposed to be cleaning. And then I started interfacing with the day shift and getting Ed to do some cleaning, and they were amazed how nice the place was getting. But it was a real dump. But Ed was amazing. Well, he was putting that story home to me where, yeah, she just graduated college. And he's telling you, he goes, all those years, he didn't build the boat. It was a kit. All he had to do was put it together and install the remote control units. He didn't build those. And I'm working at home. I had a problem at the time, but he was sort of warning me that you can go off on tangents, or you don't get to something, and you get all different problems. Now, the one night we're talking, he says his wires went bad on his car. He had a Volkswagen, and all he did was use some electrical cord. And I'm like, for what? For the high voltage wires. He says, yeah. He goes, it works great. I said, it won't work great on a rainy day. And he's looking at me like, what do you mean? I said, oh man, you have no idea. So a day went by, it might have been the next day or 2 days later, he couldn't get the car to start in the parking lot. And it was pouring out. And I'm standing out there holding an umbrella over him. And I had a rag. I gave him a dry rag. I said, wipe that all down. Because a Volkswagen is very, very small, the distance between spark plugs and everything. I don't know if they're 4 cylinders. I don't remember. But he wiped it down. And I held the umbrella over the car. And he went in and started it and started. Once he got it started, it ran a little rough, but he was able to get home. And he went out and bought himself a set of spark plugs. But he was telling me, yeah, it works really good. I'm like, it's not going to work good when it rains. I said, I've been down that road where you got a set of spark plug wires. They call it a wiring harness or whatever in the old days. And you get one bad one on a rainy day. And it's sometimes hard to find. You put a dark blanket over the car. And then you get under there and you can see it arcing or some corona. And then you change that spark plug wire. They get like cracks in them and stuff. And they'll start arcing to the chassis. I've done all that wacky stuff. And some of it's fun. And then also you could get not a spark coil goes bad, the distributor cap. They would go bad. You get a crack in them. I don't know why they would get a crack in them, but you get a crack on a rainy day. You couldn't see the moisture, but the car would run rough. And then you just change the distributor cap and it would fix the problem. I think that's it. All right, that's it.